Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number 170, recorded live on Monday, September 16th, 2013. I am your host and NFL Player of the Week, Todd Klindt, and of course, this Netcast and all of the things around it are sponsored lovingly by the folks at Rackspace. You can find out all the cool SharePoint stuff we're doing by going to sharepoint.rackspace.com. All kinds of great things. We're putting more and more free things up there. If I'd have thought ahead, I'd have had some of the, I think the resources link or something has like free webinars and all kinds of stuff. We record a bunch of the things that we do. So go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com and download a bunch of stuff and leave some notes. If you want to leave a love note for me, sharepoint.rackspace.com is an ideal place to do that so that lots and lots of my coworkers can see it and make fun of me. That's where the fun really is. So sharepoint.rackspace.com. Now on to production notes. Not a lot here. The recording and all that's been going pretty well. Sadly now, it's fallen on me. The production has gotten slow. For the last, I don't know, couple of months, something like that, I've started putting lower thirds on. I get this fancy thing at the beginning and all that kind of stuff, which makes the thing look better, but it takes more time to edit. And specifically, it takes more time because I have to go through and listen to it to put the lower thirds in and all that kind of stuff. Now, Lori, in the chat room, she does a great job. She takes notes for me at what time everything is, but I always want to check it out just to make sure that that everything lines up right. So because of all that extra time that it takes to edit these, they've been taking longer to get out. And so one of the shifts is that probably the first place that you'll see this now pop up is on YouTube because it's the easiest for me to publish it out on YouTube. So if you got to get your Todd Klindt SharePoint fixed just as fast as possible, go out to youtube.com/Todd Klindt Netcast and you can subscribe or like or pal or whatever the verb is for liking something on YouTube. And then when you go to YouTube, you'll see all that. So for 169, I think I've got the blog post out, but I forgot to update the RSS feeds and I just now thought of that. So I'll do that sometime soon. But other than that, I think the quality is good now. The audio's been good for 3 or 4 weeks now. I think I've got all that figured out. So hopefully everything's good. So we will move on to topics. Got a few fun topics today. For those of you that read my blog, I still have a blog. It's kind of cool. Kids are still doing that these days with the blogging, so I'm doing that. I've blogged a bunch this month. It's been kind of fun. I don't know what has inspired me, what's been my muse, but I have blogged a bunch. And one of the blog posts I got some viewer mail, and this one was from a guy named Leo Ortiz, and I talked to Leo and made sure that it was okay if I made him a star and said his name on the internet. And so there he is. He's probably getting attacked by groupies right now. But Leo sent me an email, and this was a great email. And it was, he said, "Hey, I bought your book, so thanks to Leo for that." Actually, I don't know if he said he bought it or just got it. He could have shoplifted it, who knows. But he said he got the book, he's reading through it, and he read the install chapter, and he read the part where we say, don't use Kerberos for central admin, and then we just move on. And he's like, hey, you say don't use Kerberos on central admin, but you don't say why not to use Kerberos on central admin. So it was kind of funny. Leo went to Rackspace and actually put like a little comment thing in there. So it came into the whole support thing, and they're like, "Hey, Todd, you're an idiot." You know, in reality, folks, that was Shane's chapter, but I stepped up, I took over. So I wrote this whole big email to Leo about why we don't recommend people using Kerberos for central admin, and I sent it to him, and I'm like, this would make an excellent blog post. And I've already written it. I just got to put the title on. I got to generate the short URL, and poof, it's done. So I did publish that last week, and the blog post is titled, "Should I Use Kerberos for Central Admin?" And so what it comes down to is he just said, hey, you say not to do this, but you don't say why. Why not? So basically it comes down to two things, and they kind of all boil around risk versus reward. For anybody who's set up Kerberos, and I've been setting up Kerberos for many years now, probably 4 or 5 years now, playing with Kerberos. Started with SharePoint 2007, and the first time I configured a web app for Kerberos, and then I think it was SSRS on the back end. The first time I got that whole thing working, it probably took me 4 days, I'm gonna guess, working on that and asking people and all that. It was pretty tough. So the thing about that is Kerberos, there's a lot of things that have to fall in place for Kerberos to work correctly, and a bunch of those things are things outside of the control of most SharePoint administrators. There's AD things that have to be set correctly, some pretty specific things, and some DNS things, and then all that stuff's got to be in place before you can even set it up for SharePoint. So the issue becomes that if you set Kerberos up and you do everything right, and the network folks screw something up, you can't log in. Kerberos is broken. And in most cases, when you're playing with Kerberos, if you break Kerberos, the first thing you do is you go into Central Admin and, oh, but it's Central Admin, it's broke, because that's where you put Kerberos. So the risk for using Kerberos on Central Admin is greater than 0. And it's even greater than 0 down the road, because if any of those things in the back end get changed by somebody other than you, even if you get it working the first time out, it might break down the road, and then you can't get into Central Admin. So the risk is, I would say, I don't want to say significant, but it's important to understand that there's risk. But what it comes back to is there is no reward, really, for using Kerberos on Central Admin. So a couple of things to think about. When you set up Kerberos, it is per web app. So whether or not Central Admin uses Kerberos has no impact on whether any of your other web apps use Kerberos, whether you use Kerberos for any of your BI stuff. Whether or not you use it on Central Admin has no impact on any of that. So you don't need it to do BI stuff, unless you're doing BI stuff in Central Admin. And I'll be honest, I've never, ever seen that once in the 10 years that I've been doing SharePoint. So you don't need Kerberos for any of the Central Admin functionality. You don't need Kerberos in Central Admin for any farm functionality. So while the risk of Kerberos breaking and you pulling all of your hair out trying to get it fixed is, this big, the reward is next to nothing. So that's kind of why we don't tell folks to do it. Now, I published that blog post and immediately had a bunch of comments on it. Trevor Seward, who is normally in here, jumped in immediately, told me what a big dummy I was and how he tells everybody to put Kerberos on Central Admin. A couple other folks jumped to my defense. One of the things that comes up with Kerberos, and not specifically in the context of Central Admin, but just Kerberos in general, is two things. People say that Kerberos is faster, and they say that Kerberos is more secure. So those are two. So the main reason that that people put Kerberos with SharePoint is BI, that whole double hop thing, but for Central Admin, that's not an issue because you're not doing BI in Central Admin. Or if you are, you're doing something wrong. So the other thing is this whole Kerberos is faster, Kerberos is more secure. So let's take them one at a time. Kerberos is faster. So on paper, I can explain why Kerberos is faster. I can put it down and I can scribble it all out and talk about packets and handshakes and tickets and all that kind of stuff. And on paper, show you how Kerberos is faster. In reality, it doesn't feel faster. It's not faster. You could do 100 tests with 100 different web apps and have people try to guess Kerberos or NTLM. They would never figure it out. It's not, you can't feel it. The human mind's not fast enough to catch that kind of stuff. And honestly, is speed in Central Admin really a big deal anyway? And the second one is more secure. So I will admit that Kerberos is more secure, but I will also say that I don't think it's secure enough to be worth the risk. So here is how Kerberos is more secure. Let's step back to NTLM. When you use NTLM to talk to SharePoint, every one of your authentication packets has a hash of your password. And so if somebody is sitting on the wire, sniffing packets and pulling that out, they can get the hash for your password and then use any number of methods to try to figure out what your password is. And if they come back tomorrow and get that hash again, it's going to be the same, because unless you change your password. So that's every time you use NTLM, the hash is the same. Kerberos, on the other hand, uses a ticket-based system. So when you log into your desktop in the morning, when you log, well, I'm going to assume everybody's Windows and Active Directory, you log in, Windows goes out and talks to a Kerberos server, which is your Active Directory servers, and says your workstation takes your password and takes the local time, jumbles it all up, and sends it across the wire. The idea with that being that your password will never look the same going across the wire, so it builds in the time. And that's also why when you start using Kerberos, all your clocks have to be synced up because the time is in on that. And so when you log in, your Windows box takes your password, takes the time, jumbles them all together, and throws them over to your Active Directory controller and says, hey, is this really Todd's password? Active Directory controller says, yep, it sure is. And instead of just logging me in, it grants me a ticket granting ticket. And that ticket granting ticket, you then take that, and then anytime you need to authenticate against something else, you say, hey, Exchange, here's my ticket granting ticket. Grant me a ticket to access you. And then you get a ticket for that specific service for 10 hours, I think is the default. Same with web, all that kind of stuff. So if you're logging into Central Admin with Kerberos, every 10 hours, the authentication ticket between your workstation and Central Admin is going to be different because it's going to get a different ticket and all that. So unlike NTLM, where it's the same hash every time, with Kerberos, it recycles every 10 hours. So yes, it is more secure in that regard. I would argue, though, that you probably don't go to Central Admin that often, and that you're only ever going to, hopefully only ever going to go to Central Admin over your internal LAN. So people aren't going to be sniffing it anyway. I realize that happens. I realize people hack from the inside, but not a lot. It's not as big a deal. So that's my thing. If you have an opinion for or against Kerberos on Central Admin, go out to my blog post, and I think I'll link it up in the chat room here again, and just give your opinion. And if you can justify your opinion, with facts or anything like that, go ahead and shout it out. But we get that question once in a while, so that was a good question from Leo. Thanks to Leo for making me type that up and blog it up. Speaking about my blog, so the last couple of weeks, I think 2 weeks ago I did it, or 3 weeks ago, whatever, I did it after the show. I talked about updating my blog. Somebody asked me about why my blog wasn't running on SharePoint 2013, and I made up some big story, and then somebody else asked me about it, and I came out and was honest, broke down, told you guys the secret shame. The secret shame is that the reason that I haven't updated my blog to SharePoint 2013 yet is because I did some very bad things to my blog in SharePoint 2010, and that is causing me some upgrade issues. Now, it will upgrade and most everything works, but there are a bunch of things that I want to fix as part of the upgrade, and I'm not able to fix those when I do my upgrade because of this terrible thing that I did when I broke my blog. So I've talked about that a couple of times on here, and I've been working on it a little bit and trying to figure out what the problem was. But then somebody left a comment on Netcast 168, and they left it anonymously, and so I can't even give them proper shout out for it. But basically what they said was that they've had this problem too. So here's what the problem was. The problem was at some point I broke the default ASPX page on my blog, and blogs aren't set up the way normal team sites or publishing sites or whatever on SharePoint are. There's a bunch of things that just get wired together weirdly. I broke my default ASPX page, and I was able to fix it, but in the process of fixing it and making it so it would render, I broke a bunch of stuff on my blog. So if you go to a regular SharePoint blog, you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, you have got the categories and things like that. Got a web part that shows the posts with the most comments and all that kind of stuff. None of those things work on my blog. You'll notice they're gone because I can't get them to work. And I've not been able to get them to work for a couple of years. And so that's part of what doesn't work when I upgrade to SharePoint 2013. But this anonymous commenter went out to my blog and said that they had that same problem too with the blog doing an upgrade. And they provided me the fix. And I'll be doggone, it worked. So what they did, what they told me to do, was go out through PowerShell and delete my default ASPX page, which was pretty scary, I'll be honest. And I did this in a test environment. it deleted my default ASPX page, and then there is a hidden feature at the web level, SP web feature, a hidden feature that is called the blog homepage. And basically you enable this feature and it creates a new default ASPX page. And I'll be doggone it worked. So I think it's out there now. Let me see if it is. But I was able to upgrade my blog and then fix my homepage so that it acts like a regular blog homepage. Yeah, there it is. So if you go out to upgrade.toddklindt.com, that is the upgraded version of my production site. So if you go to upgrade.toddklindt.com/blog, then that will get you the 2013 version. But you'll notice now that I've got the categories and stuff on the top, and I've got some other things. It looks like a regular blog page now, as opposed to this horrible thing that I've created over the last few years. So that's good. So that was a big thing that I'd kind of been stuck on. But if you go out there, you'll notice there's some other problems. For instance, comments don't work. And I haven't set any of the permissions up on that because I'm going to be deleting this. But if you go to a blog post and you look at it, you can see that it'll tell you how many comments a blog post has. But if you click a blog post, none of the comments show up. So it gives you an error, a type error. So I need to investigate that. I haven't looked into that at all. But thank you to Anonymous Commenter. I appreciate that. That got me over the hump. And so I will be playing with this more. I've got, so another thing at the top is some of my links at the top don't work, and obviously it's wrapped around. I need to look at that. But I have database backups now since the great blog loosening of 2012. I've got database backups. And so I just took one of those, I dumped it on this other server. So I'm going to be playing with this over the next couple of weeks, try to get this up and going. But I would like to get my blog switched over to SharePoint 2013 because I have these big plans of enabling authentication and having authenticated comments and stuff like that. So thanks again, but that's moving along. So thanks to whoever mysterious person. And if you go out to upgrade.toddklindt.yourmom, whatever, you will see that I've got a new blog post on there about a Patch Tuesday patch that came out a couple weeks ago. It's it's MS13-067, and one of the things that gets patched in that is this sort of nasty elevation, privilege elevation bug that exists in SharePoint 2013. SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2007, all the way back to SharePoint 2003. They patch 4 versions of SharePoint with this patch. And it looks to be sort of a nasty one. Now, the funny part about all this is a couple of blog posts before that, I have this blog post on, hey, should I install this patch or not? And so that's when this Microsoft security patch came out, a bunch of people were asking me about that. So this is one of those hot fixes sort of things. It just patches a couple of little parts of SharePoint. I've installed this patch on a couple of VMs and had weird luck with it. Microsoft, and thank goodness because it's gotten me a lot of traffic on my blog, but the way they package patches is just, it defies logic. For instance, if you go to that knowledge base page and look at it, they've got SharePoint 2010 and Office Web Apps and all that kind of stuff. For SharePoint 2013, they say there is no patch for the Office Web Apps SharePoint 2013, but under SharePoint Server, there's a patch for Office Web Apps. And then there's 2 patches for SharePoint itself. One of them's small, like 30 meg. One of them's a little bigger, like 500 meg. So it's been pretty crazy patching all that, and I've had some various degrees of luck with that. This does strike me as one of those patches that you do want to think about installing sooner rather than later. And a couple of things to keep in mind when you're installing these patches, either of the 2 for SharePoint Server. Number 1, when you're done installing the patch, you do need to run the configuration. Well, let's go back. When you at least with all the servers that I did this on, when you install the patch, you're going to have to reboot. So when you're planning this patch, plan on a reboot on all of your boxes after each patch. And then after you've patched all of your boxes and rebooted all of your boxes, then you need to run the configuration wizard on all of your boxes, because it it does need to have that done. Now the weird thing about that is, and I haven't put it on my patches page yet, because it doesn't, at least on the servers that I did, it doesn't increment your farm build number. It increments a couple of like core services and that kind of stuff. It increments their patch level, but it doesn't change the farm patch level. So I need to put that on a couple of other servers just to kind of see how all that goes. But if you have installed that patch, that MS13-067, I would love to hear about it. You can leave a comment on my blog about that. But that does seem, this one seems like kind of a scary one. So I would recommend that to my friends and my enemies. All right, so here's another good one that I noticed a few days ago. So there are a couple, you know, when you're a SharePoint admin, there's a bunch of other technologies that you really need to embrace and get good at. And for me, there's been a couple of those that I've really enjoyed working with the most, and that's PowerShell and SQL. And so whenever SQL stuff for SharePoint comes out, I always you know, kind of snatch onto it and read it. And so within the last month, Microsoft has published the Storage and SQL Server Capacity Planning and Configuration Guide for SharePoint 2013. And it's kind of a long read. There's a lot of really boring SQL stuff in there and boring SharePoint stuff, but there's also some really great things in there. So they wrote this paper, and I'm pointing at it because it's in this monitor over here. You just have to trust me. It's right there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So number one, they wrote the paper with the idea that it's for both SharePoint administrators and SQL DBAs. So that's good. So something you can send over to your DBA if you don't run your own SQL servers and say, here's the things, here's why I told you not to schedule, you know, the performance counters and that kind of stuff, or the statistics, that kind of stuff. Here's why I said not to do that. But and it has a whole bunch of guides, and it's really long, and you should read it all for yourself. But some of the highlights for me, some of the things that I was able to immediately make use of, was guidance on IOPS. So IOPS are input output per second, and it basically is a measurement of how fast your drives are. And for SQL is constantly reading things and constantly writing things. And for SharePoint to be happy, the SQL Server has to have a certain number of IOPS, both read and write, for the drives that its databases are on. But the problem is, knowing what that level is and being able to measure it and all that is very confusing. So this paper gives you some formulas on different types of databases and different uses of the databases and how to know what IOPS you need for that database to perform well. So that's really good. There's even some like formulas in here. They're using letters instead of numbers and things like that. So that's good. And I don't know if they mention it in here, but once you figure out roughly what you want your IOPS to be, there's a tool called SQL.io that you can use to measure the IOPS on a server. And essentially all SQL.io does is it just creates a bunch of crap in RAM and then writes it to disk as fast as it can and sees how long it takes. And then it takes that same bit and it reads it back into RAM as fast as it can and sees how long it takes. And then it tells you how fast the I/O is on your drives. And it's a great tool. It's a little tool. It's about 10 years old because apparently they got it right the first time. But that's a great tool for measuring the speed of your SQL boxes and then going back to this paper and seeing what your IOPS should be. Another interesting thing that they cover in here is your disk speed prioritization. And that is, you know, if you have a SQL Server with tiered storage, you've got fast drives, slow drives, drives in the middle. It tells you where you should put your fast, what databases you should put on your fast disks, what ones you should put on your slow disks, and stuff like that. So the number one thing that should be on your fastest drives is your temp DBs. And I've heard this a couple of times that from Microsoft folks. I heard it at TechEd at the Microsoft session on building SharePoint on Azure, and then in this white paper as well. They talk about how TempDB is the biggest thing that slows SharePoint down because SQL doesn't have enough TempDB or doesn't have fast enough TempDBs. And so the very fastest disks in your farm should be handling TempDB and handling the TempDB logs. And if you want to do something to improve SQL speed and in turn SharePoint speed, that's the thing you should do best. Another thing, and I don't know if they cover it in here or not, is you should have multiple temp DBs. And the old guidance was that you should have one temp DB per processor. That's kind of old news. Paul Randall has a pretty good blog post on this at SQLskills.com, and I don't have the URL handy, that talks about how you really should figure that out, how many temp DBs that you have. Jeff in the chat room is saying use SSDs for temp DBs. That is, if you can have your temp DBs on solid state drives, you will love that. Anonymous, I will talk to that in a minute. So that's the number one thing. If you can have multiple temp DBs, read up on that again. SQL Skills is a good place to do that. The next fastest thing is your database log files, your transaction logs, so that when transactions come from SharePoint through SQL, they get rid of the transaction log first and then committed to the database after that. So you want your transaction logs to have very fast writes for sure and fast reads so they can get committed. The next fastest drives in your SQL Server should go to your search databases, with the exception of your admin database. It doesn't matter if that's fast or not, but your crawl databases and your index database and your links database and all that kind of stuff, those should be on fast drives. Makes your crawls go faster, makes your queries go faster, and all that. And then finally, your database files, which is odd because everybody would think those should be at the top. But your database files probably can take your slowest disks. So, and again, in this white paper, they talk a little bit more about those decisions and all that. Another thing that they mention is that you should spread your databases over over many drives with multiple files. Now, SQL's done a pretty good job in making their terminology confusing too. For a database in SQL, you can have multiple files, and you can have multiple file groups. SharePoint, with a couple of exceptions, I think maybe one of the search databases, does not support file groups, but it does support files. And so what they're saying here is they're saying you've got a content database that has a primary file group. You should take that file group and spread it across multiple drives. And the inference with this is that those drives are separate spindles and not fighting each other for I/O. So maybe you have 4 drives, we'll say M, N, O, and P, and you take all of your content databases and the MDF for that gets put on that and then spread across. So you would have an MDF on the M drive, an NDF on the N, O, and P drive. And so whenever SQL writes something, it spreads those writes out in the reads. That makes a big increase in performance. But again, that's multiple files, not multiple file groups. That's a common mistake. And then at the end of the white paper, they've got a bunch of things that you can do for performance monitoring. You can it shows you counters and what counters to look for, and just all kinds of great stuff. That happens all the time when when people say SQL's slow, or you're trying to diagnose problems, just not knowing the SQL counters. I don't know them. I don't deal with SQL all the time, so it's tough to tell. Anonymous in the chat room is saying Windows Server 2012 has neither type of drive spreading. So this isn't a Windows thing, this is a SQL thing. When you go into a content database, or when you go into a database in SQL, you can add files, and then you can put chunks of that, and it spreads the writes and the reads out. So good white paper, a lot of great stuff in there. Kind of long, but read it over, read it a couple of times. Again, if you've got somebody else that is running your SQL boxes, it wouldn't be bad to send that to them and have them take a look at that too. All right. So a couple things before we wrap up here. We're getting close to the end of our time together. Always a sad point. I look over at the clock. We're at the high 20s, low 30s, and I start getting a little sad because our time for this week is almost over. We're getting there again. Little tear in my eye here. So just a few minutes ago on Twitter, one of my friends and I, Tom Resing, so Tom posted a tweet and said, is there an official word? Is SharePoint 2013 supported on Windows Server 2012 R2? Now, there have been multiple blog posts about that on the preview, and I did one on SharePoint 2010 on the preview, and it's also exactly the same on the RTM. But my response to Tom was, and this happens every time a new version of Windows or a new version of SQL comes out. As soon as they start talking about it, given consumer CTPs and that kind of stuff, people start asking, does SharePoint support it? Does SharePoint support it? So the problem is Microsoft has never said that a production product like SharePoint 2013 is supported by a non-RTM whatever. So they've never come out and said SharePoint 2010 works on the Windows 2012 preview or Windows 2008 R2. They just don't do that. They do all that stuff when the product is released. So while the Windows Server 2012 R2 bits, RTM bits are out, if you're on MSDN, you can download them. Some other places. Even though the RTM bits are available and the product is done, it's not available. You can't buy it yet. And so now, that used to be RTM, now that's called GA, General Availability, but that hasn't happened yet. That happens in a month from tomorrow, actually. And so Microsoft might come out and say that it's supported since the RTM bits are done, but I think we should not expect that. We're not entitled to that until the product is actually a product, until you can actually buy the darn thing. I don't think it's reasonable to demand that Microsoft make supportability arguments about that kind of stuff. So I'm guessing that on October 17th or thereabouts, we'll find out for sure. Plenty of people have installed SharePoint 2013 on Windows 2012 R2. There's a fiddly thing. My blog post on installing SharePoint 2010 on it is the same thing. There's an ASP.NET thing that you got to do because the prerequisite installer can't figure it out. I'm guessing they're not going to have that fixed. I don't know how they would do that, but it works fine, and I'm sure we'll get the official supported word here in a month or so. Finally, and this is ironic that I've got this in my notes considering some of the stuff that's been going on in the chat room tonight, but speaking of all that, I finally have Windows 8.1 RTM on my Surface device here, on my Surface Pro. Went out to MSDN and downloaded it, and Microsoft has already said, see, here's what it looks like. I know it looks, and I'm covering up my window, I can't see if you guys can see it or not. So here's what it looks like. You'll notice it looks very similar to Windows 8.1 preview, but Microsoft has said that Windows 8.1 will be a free upgrade for Windows 8. So if you have Windows 8 on something, I assume it's going to come out in the store, or kind of the same way they did the preview. So you don't need to buy another license. With the Surface Pro, though, I couldn't install it. I had to burn one of my MSDN keys because I was too impatient to wait till the upgrade comes out in a month or whenever. I'll be honest, not a lot of changes from the preview. Seems mostly okay. I put it on 2 boxes so far. Seems okay. The reason that this is all funny is because a bunch of people in the chat room are also nerds like me, and they rushed right out and put Windows 8.1 on a bunch of their devices. And apparently it doesn't work with Ustream. So everybody that put Windows 8.1 on their device before tonight hasn't been able to use that device to watch the Netcast tonight. So people are dusting off their iPads and all kinds of stuff to watch this. So I don't know what's changed, and I never even thought to try it until tonight, and it didn't work for me either. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. I don't know if Ustream knows about that, if they're going to fix that, but that was pretty ironic that I was going to have this topic in the chat tonight about how great Windows 8.1 is, but all of the people in the chat can't run 8.1 because it doesn't work with the chat. But good stuff. So this was an interesting thing, and I saw a conversation about this earlier. If you have a license for Windows 8, you will get Windows 8.1 for free. It's included. It's like a service pack or whatever. However, if you have Windows Server 2012, you do not get Windows 2012 R2 for free. Last that I read. And so nobody at Microsoft has come out and said this, I don't think. But there was an interview with somebody, and Mary Jo Foley had it on her a blog post on her website. Basically said for people who want Windows 2012 R2, they're going to have software assurance. So it sounds like if you bought Windows 2012 a year ago when it came out, you get to buy Windows 2012 R2 if you don't have software assurance. I also don't know how CALs, the client access licenses, are handled with that. But on the client side, it's free. On the server side, it's not. in the chat room, Brian LaLancette, the godfather of the AutoSP installer, says, I don't imagine there's a way to upgrade an RT yet, is there? I have not seen the Windows 8.1 RTM for RT yet. That's a little different because of the way RT is locked down, so you can't run installers. Microsoft can, other people can. It's very weird. But no, my RT device, which is running this thing right here, is still running the preview. I don't know how to upgrade it. But the upgrade process was pretty smooth. It went through, and when I did the upgrade, now they said, I zapped my Service Pro back to Windows 8 because they said that you could not upgrade from 8.1 preview to 8.1 RTM. But the upgrade process went pretty well. It noticed it was an upgrade. It asked me for a key. I had to go burn one of those. But then it said, what do you want to save? Nothing. Your apps and your documents are just your documents. So it was pretty good. I had just blasted it back to the default Windows 8 thing, so I told it not to keep anything. But got it all set up. Got it on my domain. Everything's been working pretty well. Like I said, it's very similar to the preview. Been working. Been pretty happy with it. So if you've got MSDN, you can go and get that now for any of your devices. For RT devices, we're going to have to wait until they pushed out through the store, something like that. All right, I think that is it. So we'll take a couple of minutes for me to talk about some stuff. So first off, still planning on having an article published at the Hey Scripting Guy blog next month. And very excited about that. That's a great platform, and I've got some other ideas for blog posts I want to write for them. But this came out of a thing. Ed Wilson, the Hey Scripting Guy, is writing a PowerShell book, and he reached out to a few of us in the community and said, "Hey, I would like you to write a little snippet for my book about PowerShell." So Ed and I chatted a little bit about the content of that, and basically it was about how I became a PowerShell convert, and I don't have problems writing things, but I always need a nudge in the right direction. So anytime anybody ever asks me to write something, I always need a topic, because I'm not very good at coming up with topics on my own, and I need a size. I need a number of words so that I kind of know what to shoot for, because I can get awfully chatty and awfully wordy if I'm not reined in. So I asked Ed what he wanted to chat about. We talked about some ideas, and I said, how long do you want? And he's like, oh, it doesn't matter. So I wrote him like this 1,200 word thing, this essay, and I sent it to him, and he's like, Todd, that's great and all, but it's about 7 times too big for the space that I have. So why don't you write me back something in about 200 words for me to put in the book, and then I will take this tome that you wrote, and I will publish it on my blog. So that's kind of how that worked. But then I've got some other stuff that I'm going to write for him too. So if you don't already go to the Hey Scripting Guy blog, you owe it to yourself. It's got all kinds of great stuff. It's PowerShell, but he covers all kinds of other products. He has a lot of guest bloggers. So like Doug in the chat room is saying that they've got some stuff on System Center Orchestrator, all kinds of good stuff, SharePoint blogs. So Ed's a good guy. He does a lot for the community. So go visit his blog. Give him some hits. They're good folks. Of course, if you haven't already, shame on you, but you should buy my SharePoint 2013 admin book. You can go to www.toddklindt.com/pro SP2013 admin. Find out all about it. Find out about how great it is. Get a look at the cover so that you can just really get excited about it. And then also, if you want to buy a copy from me, you can buy an autographed copy. There's a link there on how to do that. Had one just come out. Somebody bought one just this week, so a shout out to Scott, I believe, for buying that. Sent that off today. Dropped that in the mail. Thanks for that. But if you want a copy of your own, if you want it autographed, if you want bad things written about Shane in it, it's all you. You can go out there to Pro SP 2013 admin on my blog and get a copy of that. And finally, there's been a lot of buzz about this little event going on, little thing called the SharePoint Conference. The SharePoint Conference Twitter account, I believe. Do people still go to Twitter? Is that still? I think people still go to Twitter. So they were out on the Twitter today or yesterday or some of the time, and they said that the registration is going to be opening for the SharePoint Conference pretty soon. So if you haven't already, go out to SharePointConference.com, and there's a bunch of ways to hook up with them. Following them on Twitter, liking them on Facebook, rubbing their leg on Pinterest or whatever happens on Pinterest, but all that kind of way. So as soon as they open up the registrations, you can get registered. I think every SharePoint conference ever has sold out, I think. I'd have to look back. I missed the first one. But I think all the SharePoint conferences have sold out. So now's the time to start talking to your boss, getting some funds set up. It's going to be March 3rd through the 6th, 2014. It's going to be in Las Vegas at the Venetian. So thank goodness it's not at Mandalay Bay. But the Venetian is up a little farther north on the strip there on the other side of the road. Good venue. But start planning for that. Hopefully you and all of your SharePoint buddies will be at the SharePoint conference. So I think that's it. Once again, I've gone horribly over. Thanks to everybody. I'm actually going to be on the road the next 3 days, so I probably won't get around to editing this until, Thursday or Friday. But when I do, you can get it on YouTube first, youtube.com/Todd Klindt Netcast, and then, of course, up on my blog. Again, thanks to everybody who writes in. You see my man Leo. He's famous now for writing me in a question, and the anonymous poster that posted my help on my upgrade. So if you've got something, send me an email, todd.klindt@rackspace.com. Leave a comment on my blog. Hit me up on Twitter, however, and I might make you famous. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to the folks in the chat room. You've been very chatty and helpful tonight. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody else. I will see you next week. Good night.